Yeah.
What is going on, everybody? This is Dr. Chris Featherstone here for yet another episode of Unscripted. So there's a person in the middle that we're going to jump right into because there's a lot to talk about today. Of course, we have my friend, my partner in crime. Oh, did I say crime?
You did. I'm not a criminal. There's a lawyer in the center here.
No, man. I didn't mean to say.
Already you're getting me in
excuse trouble. That. Please excuse the Freudian slip there.
Partner in podcasting.
Partner in, yes, in old wrestling stories. There you go. Bill Apter, how are you, man?
Yes, I'm good. And I want to let everybody know before we start this interview, we want to thank our guest, of course, but these are all based upon all the allegations that have come out recently about this whole Vince McMahon mess.
Indeed. I imagine that the lawyer is ready to rock and roll and say all the right stuff to protect us as a Sportskeeda.
You want to give the people watching a little bit about your background?
Yes, indeed. So this guy is Dmitry Shaknovich. Did I get it right for the second time in a row?
You did. You were so good a second ago. I had a doubt, but you recovered.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much.
Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yes, indeed.
Sure. So firstly, thank you for having me on. It's great to be with you. Dmitry Shaknovich. That's right. Say that 5 times fast. I'm a lawyer here in New York. I defend criminal cases. I litigate civil cases as well. And I do stuff like this. I have a YouTube channel that the link seems to be on the bottom of the screen now, where I provide legal analysis and interview folks on the law and other things. So please feel free and subscribe. And I am ready for all of your questions. A lot to talk about.
Yes, indeed.
Dr. Chris.
Bill Apter. So let's jump right into it. Of course, people know why he is on here right now. He is on here because we wanted a legal representative to give us all of the right stuff when it comes to these allegations regarding the former chairman of the WWE, former board member, former executive head honcho chairman of TKO Holdings, Vince McMahon, who recently stepped down last week because of the allegations. Of course, he did not admit to any of the allegations, which I imagine Dimitri is going to let us know, which is very normal in this legal process.
Yeah, he said he will defend it he will really, really defend that he didn't do anything wrong.
Yes, and that is very normal in this process, and I'm looking forward to talk to Dimitri actually, because I have a PhD in forensic psychology, so I'm very familiar with the courts from a psychological standpoint. So I'm looking forward to having a conversation.
I want to ask a non-psychological question, since I don't have the background you have, Dr. Chris or Dimitri. But does someone resigning in lieu of all these allegations almost admittedly guilty?
Is that not Chris? That for you, or is that for me?
For you.
No, not really. There are ways that folks that are accused of committing certain acts can protect themselves. For example, if there's a settlement discussion that is undertaken after a lawsuit is filed, then what's said after the settlement discussion can't be used in court. There's also basically a rule of evidence that says that remedial measures can't be used against a party, right? If there is, just to simplify, for example, accident where a sidewalk is broken and then the defendant, after a lawsuit, fixes the sidewalk, you can't run into court and say, oh, look, that sidewalk was fixed. That means it must have been negligently broken prior to the fixing, right? So the law provides for some kind of measures to protect against guilt as an inference because of that kind of thing.
Okay.
Fantastic. So just your overall thoughts, Dimitri, before we start picking your brain when it comes to the legal stuff. Just your kind of 10,000-foot view on looking at this from your expertise. As far as Janelle Grant, basically the accusations as of now, and what we heard is that there was some hush money from something, a few years ago. There was supposed to be $3 million. It was allegedly unpaid. That caused her to blow the whistle, but that was under the cause of the NDA being broken because of the NDA doesn't protect any type of criminal sexual acts. So we know other stuff as far as like the trafficking.
It was 3 million actually, Chris, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's what I said, 3 million. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you said 1.
No, it was 3 million. Okay. So basically that's what we know. And then of course some other things that we know as far as the allegations were she was allegedly used for a notable former UFC champion that they were trying to renegotiate. A lot of people are saying Brock Lesnar is that name, and John Laurinaitis is also a part of the allegations. And so that's basically the Cliff Notes version of what we know. Your thoughts on that initially?
So at the outset, what Bill said at the beginning is absolutely right. Number one, these are all allegations, right? It's important to point that out. That kind of gets lost in the shuffle here. Sure. As it does, by the way, in every case of this nature, not just this one, right? So it's important to keep that in mind. We're at the very beginning of the process. And as time passes, this will fade in the press, at least to some degree. And it's important to remember that this is the beginning. It's not the end. And so the evidence will be determinative here, right? The deposition testimony, if it gets there, will be determinative, not what's in a complaint, which is important because it sets the framework for the case, but it's not evidence of anything. Number two, and I see some folks in your comments are writing about it, and folks all over are writing about it, about him being sentenced and going to jail and all these other things. This is not a criminal case, right? This is the mistake that many people made, at least in their minds, when P. Diddy was sued a few months back, and in other cases such as this, right? Nobody goes to jail as a result of a civil case. Now, as a result of the conduct underlying the case, right, the allegations seem criminal, and so people make that jump, and that's fine. But we can't draw inferences that aren't there, right? Even if he would be arrested or charged or indicted, right, he would be presumed innocent anyway. He hasn't been any of those things. So he's really presumed innocent. And it's important to separate those two. Nobody is going to jail, at least not right now, at least not as a direct result of this case. That's number two. Number three, the issue with the NDA, an NDA is a contract.
By the way, for our fans who don't know what that is, that's a non-disclosure contract.
Yes, I'm sorry about that.
It's
so
okay.
An NDA is a non-disclosure agreement, which is a contract, right, between two parties that says you don't talk about something, and in exchange you get some benefit, money or something else. Breaching an NDA has no impact on sexual assault allegations, right? If you breach a contract, then you don't get the benefit of the contract. That doesn't mean that the other party is somehow compromised in litigating sexual assault allegations or whatever else may have been disclosed that would otherwise have not been disclosed. So those are the three main points. And obviously there are a whole bunch of other subsidiary points here, but it's important to keep all that in mind.
Fantastic. So if, say, for instance, if everything goes through the legal process and Vince McMahon and the allegations are proven to be true, what is the maximum punishment in the court of law that Vince McMahon could receive because of these allegations?
So these kinds of cases are separated generally into two phases. There's a liability phase and a damages phase, right? The liability phase is designed to determine what happened and what he did wrong, right? If you pass that phase, you get to the damages phase, which seeks to determine how much, right, the extent of the damage, which will require in a case like this, expert testimony, testimony from mental health professionals, I presume, right, and other such evidence. So it's entirely too premature to make that kind of determination. As you can imagine, the complexity behind the degree of suffering and the range of suffering that somebody like this can go through ranges just enormously.
So that leads me to this question. And again, we're discussing this openly. These are all alleged. But the reasoning for the victim here, and she was the victim, letting this go on so long, could that be a negative part of her defense here?
So that's a great question, right? If this case ever gets to a trial, she will be cross-examined, right? And on cross-examination, his lawyers will ask her all of those questions. The purpose behind that will be to impeach her, right? To question her credibility before a jury. And when it comes to cases such as this, that process has to be done delicately because the allegations are frightening. This woman was victimized, right? And so it's a difficult, fragile process to go through. But that kind of thing will be flushed out on cross-examination, perhaps earlier at a deposition, but really on cross-examination at a trial.
So based on the information that you know and what's public, all this is public information, what is the strongest pieces of evidence that both Janelle Grant have for the prosecution and Vince McMahon and company have for the defense? So separately, what are Janelle's strongest pieces that you know that's public, and what are Vince and company's strongest pieces that you know that are public right now?
So again, it's funny because there is no evidence yet. There's no anything yet. There are just allegations, right? And so it's tough to say what pieces of evidence are important because no evidence has been provided yet. No,
so the screenshots and all that, those things would be evidence though, right?
They may be. So the screenshots that you mentioned, the screenshots, right? Those are pretty big because from what I've seen, and again, time will tell what they actually are and what they mean. But from what I've seen, they seem to create at least a relationship between the parties, right? Generally, that would have to be proven. That's not a given. Here, assuming what's in those text messages is true, that creates some relationship between the parties, perhaps an intimate relationship, and that gets the plaintiff here far, right? Because the content is pretty heavy in those text messages. In terms of the best evidence for the defense, that's just impossible to tell. No response of pleading has been filed yet. In other words, no answer to these allegations. And obviously no discovery, right? Discovery is the document exchange process that may take months and months to get through. That is where the meat of this case will come out. That is where lawyers make a lot of their money, right? Because of the paperwork and other things. And then depositions, right? And in a case like this, The parties will be deposed, obviously, and you may have non-parties being deposed. There are some witnesses that were named in the complaint. There were some witnesses to whom there were allusions made in the complaint.
Yeah.
Maybe other people will come out. So in a case like this, it'll be interesting to see kind of how that whole story develops and what the evidence will show. That's what'll matter.
Now, this alleged thing, these things that happened, allegedly happened before Endeavor TKO had purchased WWE, but they did bring Vince McMahon back on into the TKO company. Would they have any legal problems because they brought him in here?
That's a great question. So generally speaking, when companies merge, companies are bought out, depending on the terms of that agreement, liability may pass, right? And then in those agreements, there are what are called indemnification clauses, which are provisions in contracts that say if you do something wrong and we cover it, you then owe us that money. So who knows how that process will work out. But generally, in terms of vicarious liability, even if TKO was the owner at the time of the conduct, generally vicarious liability, meaning one party being liable for the conduct of another, doesn't pass with what they call intentional torts, right? Intentional conduct. This is intentional conduct. And just like in any employer-employee relationship, that's generally not covered because, again, it's hard to foresee this kind of stuff happening. And so employers tend to wash their hands clean. But it really depends on the nuances of the relationship between TKO and the prior owners and them and Vince McMahon, what the details of his relationship are with TKO or were rather with TKO. So a lot of nuance there that nobody knows and nobody may ever know.
So a couple other names, potentially Brock Lesnar and John Laurinaitis was mentioned in the allegations as well. What's the, I guess, maximum penalty that both of them could experience throughout this process when this is done?
So it's the same story, right? If they're identified further with more detail, if their identities are disclosed and they're formally brought into the case, at least I know for the name that folks think is Brock's name, that's not out in the open yet. It's not in the case formally. Once that's brought in, once the evidence comes out as to all those people, the same process will be undertaken.
Okay. And the maximum penalty could be what, potentially?
Depending on what the evidence shows and their degree of culpability, which is just, we just don't know. I mean, look, we just don't know. It's easy to jump to conclusions and try to fill in these gaps. We just don't know.
One of the fans had just asked this, and I was coming up with that same question. But if this gets too ugly for TKO, even though he's no longer there, is there something that TKO can do? I mean, would they be able to pull out of this whole agreement at this point? If we don't know what the contract is, but since the monies are paid for the sale in chapters, so to say, is this something that TKO could say, we didn't anticipate this, thank you very much, but we're not going to continue the relationship?
It's possible that can happen, but really, in my experience, that tends to be more of a business decision, not a legal decision. I don't know if the sale can be pulled back, but they'll have to make that determination as the case moves forward.
So when it comes to, like, let's have some fun cross here, some role play cross here. So if you were representing Janelle, what would be one of the first cross questions you would ask Vince? And what if you were representing Vince, what would be one of the first cross questions you would ask Janelle?
Well, the first thing I would do for either party is get all the discovery that's available. It's going to be a fight, right? Because the plaintiff in this case will try to get every text message that Vince probably has ever sent in the past X amount of years, right? Because the more evidence they can get, the more potential there is that he's going to have something dirty come out. And that'll help them no matter what. right? So they're going to want that. His lawyers are going to fight that. They're going to say that these requests are irrelevant, overly burdensome, problematic for whatever reason. And so that's going to be a big, big fight. If I were her lawyers, and I'm sure they're doing it, they should cast a very wide net to make sure they get every text message, every email, every prior allegation against Vince. I know there have been some in the past already. Every NDA, right? They're going to fight them on that because those are inherently confidential documents. And if you're Vince's lawyers, the same story, right? Pin her to a story. Make sure that if you're Vince's lawyers, you get everything on his phone that he said to her or anybody regarding this case, and establish your theory of defense. Once you do that, you can start gathering the evidence, substantiating that theory, and figuring out how you're going to implement it once you're in court. So again, we're at the evidence gathering stage. Gather the evidence, right? Because you have to make sure that you have everything in front of you, and then you're not hit with any surprises as time passes.
She accepted the $1 million out of the $3 million. Does that make this more shady? That how come you're coming out now? He didn't pay you the final $2,000, $2 million. So now you're doing this, but she already accepted that $1 million. So if you're, again, the legal representation for her, where do you go from there?
So, if you're his lawyers, right?
His lawyers. Okay.
Yes, you're going to be looking forward to that, right? Because your biggest defense, it seems for now, from what we know for now, is put her on the stand and say she's making all this up. And the reason she's making all this up is because she had a motive. She wasn't paid, right? While she was being paid, she wasn't making this up. And now that she stopped being paid, this lawsuit comes out, right? That seems to be at least some version of the defense. It's going to be that.
Right.
And her argument will be, look, for whatever reason, I came to a conclusion that at this point in time, this was the right time to do it. And a jury will determine whether or not she's lying or telling the truth. It's as simple as that. And all this other legal stuff will serve to better focus that whole debate. But that will be the question.
Regarding the screenshots, they're pretty vulgar. If based on what we saw, how important would the vulgarity and the content of the screenshots play in her evidence if she does present that in the courts?
Are these screenshots that she supplied, Dr. Chris?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, those are screenshots. Well, based on the reports, those are the screenshots that she allegedly submitted. So
okay.
That's what's how important the vulgarity of those. I mean, we were talking about defecation and things like that, and all those things that were part of the screenshots. How important will that pull on the heartstrings of the jury? I know that there's voir dire process when it comes to jury selection and stuff like that, and it's supposed to be neutral and balanced as far as the jury is concerned, and not having personal type of feelings, but. And from your experience, the vulgarity of those screenshots, how do you think they'll be in play when it comes to the jury and the court process?
Yeah.
So it depends on volume. That's actually a great question. So in every case, there's a rule of evidence, whether you're in federal court, in state court, wherever, that seeks to limit prejudicial effect of evidence. Mm-hmm. What I mean by that is whenever you have a piece of evidence, the jury is supposed to be guided by the probative value of the evidence, the relevance, the usefulness of that evidence, not by prejudicial value, not by things in that evidence, statements, comments that may make them kind of turn an eye and make them put their face in their palms, right? And so what Vince's lawyers will say is that these text messages have to be redacted in part, because if they're not, it'll have a prejudicial, improper effect on Vince, right? Because they won't care what he did. They'll just see this horrifying language and he'll be done. And then the question will become how much of that evidence is out there. If there are 400 text messages and each of them are vulgar, you're going to have a problem precluding all of those vulgar statements from coming in. If it's 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, that's a different story. Then you can kind of deal with that, right? But the fear will become, as the evidence comes out, as these text messages come out, will the content be so horrifying that it doesn't matter what else happened, right? It doesn't matter if the allegations are true or not. Will the evidence paint Vince as being so horrible, such a piece of garbage, that a jury won't look at anything anymore? And at that point, there's really going to have to be some creative lawyering done to make sure that that evidence is precluded, assuming there's no settlement, which, by the way, there probably will be, as there virtually always is.
Let's go more with that as far as the settlement. So do you think that this will be settled out of court, or do you think that's Janelle? I mean, just based on your experience, do you think that Janelle want the maximum based on her, experience and all of this? Do you think she won't be okay with the settlement? What do you think will happen there?
I personally, by the way, think that Vince McMahon would like to settle this out of court and the whole thing hushed. It settled it, and they go on with their lives. I think, knowing him, I think that's the way he would like to do that. Just my opinion.
Sure. What do you think Janelle Dimitri will want from this, based on what we saw, what we see already?
And I agree with that, right? So statistically speaking, well over 90% of cases settle. So if you're just going by the numbers, this will probably settle. But beyond that, the exposure here is so wide, because let's not forget, at some point, if this case doesn't settle and it moves forward, depositions will be conducted. Depositions are testimonies under oath, right? Where a witness will get in a room, raise his or her hand, and testify as to certain things. In a case like this, the testimony may have certain criminal implications. And so his lawyers will need to make sure that he doesn't testify in this case, because you're not entitled to the same privileges in a civil case as you are in a criminal case, right? The Fifth Amendment privilege exists, but not in the same way. And so you really have to be careful, because if he's forced to testify, and he'll have to testify as a party in this case, he'll either have to take the Fifth. If he takes the Fifth in a civil case, that may result in problems for him, because the judge may issue what's called an adverse inference. The judge can tell the jury that you can hold that against him, right? You can't do that in a civil case. You can't do it in a criminal case. And if he does testify, then he testifies to things that can really hurt him if he's ever charged with a crime. And that's the big deal here, right? There are a whole lot of things that our system of laws can take from you. Your freedom is up there as the most severe. Money's severe too, but Vince has a whole lot of money.
Does settling out of court, again, like a question I asked at the beginning of the show, does that kind of intonate guilt, or just that you don't want the details out there? You want this over with and good night?
It's not supposed to be an indicator of guilt, right? And maybe in the settlement agreement, there'll be a provision that says that this is being settled, but not because there's any wrongdoing, but simply because we want to avoid future costs and expenses. That happens all the time. And there will be confidentiality provisions in that settlement agreement as well. And so, no, the short answer to your question is it's not supposed to be an indicator that he did something wrong and is trying to hide. But many people do look at it that way. It's just nothing you can do about that.
High-powered attorneys on both sides, okay? What does something like this cost Vince? What does it cost Janelle? People out there are wondering, what's a lawyer going to charge for a case this high profile?
So it's different on the plaintiff side. A case like this is probably being done in a percentage. Most cases like this are not taken with upfront funds, though it's possible. That's typically not how these cases are done, right? If and when there's a settlement or a verdict, the lawyers will probably take a cut. That's how it'll work on the plaintiff side. And on the defense side, it'll be a long and expensive defense. If this isn't settled in the next few weeks, maybe month and change, it'll be a very long, seven-figure expense.
I was going to ask, does it go as far as seven figures when it comes to this expense? As far as timeline, what do you think? Like in a case that's usually like this, given the timeline from we saw it all just kind of come out to the public about a couple of weeks ago, if this does go to court, what do you think what's usually a timeline that would happen from the first court hearing to the very, judgment at the very end?
So it depends on the case. It depends on the judge. Judges are different. Courtrooms are different. Calendars are different. I would say in a case like this, it should be done within a year and a half.
Okay.
But it depends, right? If more parties come out, now more parties need to participate. If more witnesses come out, now more witnesses may need to be deposed. And so these deadlines are fluid. But judges like to make sure that they keep a leash on the parties to make sure they don't get out of hand. I'm assuming that'll be the case here.
If they do go to court, would this probably take place in Connecticut?
Well, this already is court, and I forget off the top of my head where it was brought. My recollection is it was brought in federal court, and I don't remember where. It's possible that it's Connecticut, and it'll be litigated there, unless it is moved, but that's unlikely.
Okay.
So with this going to court, and with a lot of the public outlets covering this, they don't really cover wrestling, or wrestling matches much. They do cover cases like this when it comes to legal. How much of a dent and how much of a mark do you think that this will leave in WWE as a whole, whether innocent, rather guilty? Your thoughts on just the mark that this will leave for WWE in the near future?
Yeah, so that's more of a public relations question than a legal question, but it doesn't take a genius to figure out that it's probably not good.
Yeah.
I mean, the allegations are really horrifying here. Mm-hmm. They are long in their scope. They involve several different parties. They involve, at least from what we know now, possibly text messages and other kinds of evidence. And let's keep in mind, they come on the heels of other allegations that came out some time ago that at least are in this same kind of world. We don't know really what those cases were about in the same detail that we know about this, but it's in that same kind of thing, right? And all of those things combined can't be a good look, much less, legally significant. It can't be a good look.
Yeah. Bill, you got anything before I ask a closing question?
No, I appreciate your Chris, and I appreciate what you brought to the table here today, and I'm sure this opens up and educates a lot of the fans as to how this legal process will work, whether it's settled in court, done in court with a jury, whether it's settled out of court, and what the damages could possibly be here.
Yeah. And along those lines, from a public eye, what should we expect next from what you think and your experience of what's next in the process in this legal, these allegations?
It's funny. A few months ago, there was a lawsuit filed against P. Diddy about in regards to sexual assault and other things. And I did a whole bunch of press, both the traditional press and then this kind of press. And they asked me the same question, and I gave a general response that, was my opinion on how it was going to go. And then it settled literally 12 hours later. I woke up in the morning and the news said that it settled. So you just don't know. Cases typically don't settle on the next day. That happens very rarely. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming it will settle. I'm assuming it will settle fast. I don't think it'll settle right away. I don't think it'll settle tomorrow. But it could, and it could settle down the line. I think this will end in a settlement. And that is how most of these cases end, for a reason. Yeah. And I think that's how it'll end here.
And I wouldn't put it past Vince 2 days after the settlement to be on the Pat McAfee show.
Sure. Yeah. Now, this is the civil case. Now, the allegations are sex trafficking. So, could this go criminal in any way?
Could it? Yes.
Okay.
And we don't know if that process is going anywhere at all, right? What we know now is that he hasn't been arrested, right? That's all we know. That may mean that this plaintiff went to law enforcement and maybe they didn't believe her, right? Maybe she didn't at all go to law enforcement and they only caught wind of this recently. Maybe she went and then decided to back off. It could mean a variety of different things. Law enforcement, in order to prosecute a case, has to meet a certain standard. It can't, just to file a lawsuit in civil cases, all you need is a lawyer who will file a suit in good faith, right? It can't be frivolous. It can be done in 20 minutes, right? Anybody can do it. And obviously lawyers are bound by rules of ethics and they have to make sure that they file complaints that have good faith. They can't make stuff up. We understand all that. But law enforcement operates under a different standard, right? They have to determine whether or not there's probable cause to make an arrest. In a case like this, they have to really cross their T's, dot their I's, because there will be defense lawyers here. There will be high-profile, high-powered defense lawyers. There will be expensive investigators here. And so it's a bit of a different standard. So we don't know what the status of any criminal investigation is. We don't know if there is one at all. We don't know if there will ever be one. But the allegations here do kind of sound criminal. And so, is it possible? Sure. We can't, again, jump to that conclusion. That would simply be unfair to do. We'll see.
One of the fans wants to know, and this is interesting, what's the definition of sexual trafficking, since that's mentioned in this case?
So again, that really, really depends. Sex trafficking is kind of a catch-all term, right? It could mean a variety of different sexual misconduct crimes. And don't forget, in our country, these crimes differ by state. So it really depends. If there is, for example, interstate sex trafficking, the plaintiff then has to choose the forum in which to bring the case, right? That's a really, really detailed question. There's just no answer for it, at least not in that way. Defining sex trafficking legally is very hard to do unless you know where it's being defined, under what circumstances, in what state.
Only because when you see these things on TV, sex trafficking is like prostitution.
Right. The general understanding among folks is that sex trafficking is an act of sexual misconduct, typically involving more than one person, typically involving more than one location. But that's a vague definition that means nothing, right? It depends on the details, right? That's where the devil is in the details here.
Yeah. Got to respect the super chats. We got Rollin 499. Mr. McMahon has been the owner of the WWE for 41 years. Can a woman bring a similar issue from my 1983? What are the statutes of limitations?
Good question.
That's great question.
Yeah.
Right. So what happened after the Me Too movement is many states and many executives in many states and many legislatures in many states came out and expanded the statute of limitations. It happened here in New York, which is why you saw a few months ago all of these cases brought on one day, right? Because the statute was expiring and P. Diddy and Jamie Foxx and the mayor here and other people were sued, Cuomo, right? A bunch of people. And many states have done that because victims of sexual assault come out and say, well, this is ridiculous, right? We were assaulted back in the day. And now because the public perception is different, we're out of luck. And so a lot of states expanded the statute of limitations. So it depends on where you are, right? If you're in a certain state and you're protected in that way, you could still bring a lawsuit from whenever ago, 30, 40, 50 years ago. Obviously, if you bring a case from 30 years ago, you may be short on evidence, right? You may be short on preserving certain documents and other physical evidence, but you can still technically bring the case.
Yeah.
Look at all the people that are coming out in the Bill Cosby world from so long ago. Yeah, from
That's
so
right.
long ago.
That's right. Mm-hmm. That's a great question.
Yeah, you made a really good point too, as far as it's like if it is 1983, you have to think about the forensics too, and just the evidence that's being presented to a court 40 years later, and there's so many, so much evidence that, is no longer, what I mean, and things like that. It would be very difficult to present that as far as, if it's sexual, there's, the kits usually only last, that's only like within a 72-hour thing. And what type of evidence do you have? It's not like you keep in type of like sperm or something like that. So it would be a lot of different factors in it to make the issue or the case much more difficult 40 years later.
Then again, some of the forensics and things that they're doing in that world are so right on track at this point that they're finding things that they could never find 40 years ago.
Yeah, that's usually mitochondrial DNA. That's usually like teeth imprints and things like that they're in the forensic world as far as like criminal cases and stuff like that. But when it comes to like sexual cases, it gets pretty difficult with that. So
yeah, but I will say that most of these cases, even the ones that took place recently, are still credibility cases, right? Very rarely in a case like this will you have a whole lot of evidence, right? Because you're dealing with an intimate encounter, and then generally you may not even have a third party. In this case, they may, right? You may not even have text messages. In this case, they may. But generally, you don't have a whole lot of evidence no matter what, because you're dealing with such a difficult set of circumstances for these victims.
Yep. Absolutely. All right, Dimitri, it's been a pleasure, man. I really enjoyed picking your brain. And, I imagine
I don't know if there's much to pick, but I appreciate it.
Oh, there's 40
my line.
40 minutes of picking. So I think we picked enough. I imagine you'll be covering more of this on your channel as the news continue to break and stories develop on this, and let the listeners know where to find you on your channall as well.
And we'd love to have you back, by the way, when those things break.
Yeah,
I appreciate it. I'd love to come back. I had a great time. And if you want to find me on YouTube, it's youtube.com @DShackLaw. That's DSHAK Law, LAW. And of course, you can reach out to me at any time. My email is ds@dshacklaw.com. You can find me online wherever. Always happy to ask questions or rather answer questions and come on and talk to you guys. I had a terrific time. Thank you.
Indeed. You said ds@dshacklaw.com, right?
Yeah. When you have a long name like mine, you really have to do what you can to fix it. So that's what I came up with.
I'll just call you DS.
Sounds good.
That's smart.
Counselor DS.
Indeed.
That's smart.
It's been a pleasure, man. Fun times, fun picking your brain, and as stories and news continues to develop, we would love to have you back.
By the way, I've been yelling for months about having our Twitters put down there, and now it's the wrong Twitter.
What is it?
At After One Wrestling.
After One Wrestling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got you.
But I am the After Chat.
After One Wrestling. That's your thing. After One Wrestling.
That's my Twitter handle.
Yeah,
in homage to the late great Bob Ryder, who owned OneWrestling.com and put me to work many years ago. Yeah,
check it out again.
Thank you, Dr. Chris.
Well, we got you. At After One
Wrestling.
I'm
going to get my lawyer. Can I talk to you about this wrong? Twitter
well, he's already representing me, so it's too late. I already paid him about 45 minutes ago. So
if I'm going to pick up clients when I come on here, I'll do it every day.
Sounds good. At D-Shack Law, that's where to find him if you want to have him. He's in the New York area. Clearly, within more than 40 minutes, he knows his stuff, and he'll be a good representative of you. And go ahead and check him out if you're in New York, New Jersey, in surrounding Pennsylvania. Yeah, what is that? What is that called?
Area.
No. What's that called? That's called the New England. That's the New England area. That's what I'm looking for.
Well, I'm only licensed in New York and New Jersey, but happy to talk to anybody.
He'll give you referrals. There you go. from New England area. All right, we got Dimitri, we got Bill.
Raju says this is the longest Chris and Bill have gone without fighting. Really? Is that right, Chris?
That's because we have a lawyer in the middle. So we got Bill, we got Dimitri. I'm Dr. Chris. This is Unscripted. Have a good night, everybody. So
we'll see you in court.
Oh.